dead. I want to see him dead.
Hello everyone, this is Darion of GNB Productions, and today we're going to be taking a look at The Penguin.
The Penguin released in 2024 and is a spin-off of Matt Reeves' The Batman, released in 2022. The series centers around the titular bird Oswald Cobb after the death of notorious crime bird Carmine Falcone in The Batman sees a power vacuum in the criminal underworld of Gotham, and we follow him as he takes any means necessary to fill that vacuum himself. I have yet to review The Batman on the channel, but to keep it short and sweet, I loved the shit out of it. But to keep it relevant, I loved Colin Farrell as the Penguin. Despite his minimal screen time, he was without a doubt one of the most enjoyable aspects of the film, and when I heard we'd be getting a spin-off, I was intrigued. A story centered around one of Batman's most notable villains, and a way to dive deeper into the world Matt Reeves created in The Batman was a surefire way to get me interested.
Unfortunately, the marketing didn't really do much to grab me. At most, when watching the trailers and ads, it just looked fine. Nothing really had my big ass bouncing off the walls like the Batman film did. But eventually, the time came, the first episode dropped, and they had me hooked almost immediately.
Something that can already be said about the show is the world building. It is, for the most part, really good, but has a few rough spots for me. Well, not even rough, but just kinda distracting. The best part about this show, and strangely the thing that's kinda distracting about it, is the fact that it's a Batman spinoff that very quickly forgets that it's a Batman spinoff. I say it as a positive because the world they've crafted here is just so intriguing. This universe being primarily centered around the crime thriller aspect really sells it for me. And just seeing this show dive into it the way that it does is really cool, and I'll get into that in just a bit. But that also gets kind of distracting because outside of the first and kinda last episode, they kinda act like Batman just doesn't exist.
Like, I'm not saying I wanted him to show up or anything, because I unironically think his presence would have made the show slightly worse for me. But there is just so much bullshit that goes down in the city of Gotham, on top of a bunch of shootouts and gang meetups and whatnot, that not having to be mentioned a few more times just feels a bit odd. I don't think this would have significantly improved the show, but I just feel like it'd be more interesting had these characters acted like they lived in a world where there's a crazy ass nigga in a military grade batsuit that will pull up and rock their shit, you know?
Anyway, the world building and story they crafted here was absolutely incredible. There's been a big talk about this universe in particular, with how grounded and realistic it aims to be, and based off of this show, I'm all the more for it, honestly. Grounded and realistic Batman is never my preferred route to take the character, even though I find it interesting, but the world Matt Reeves created in The Batman was perfectly tailored for a series like this. Seeing the ways the criminal underworld of this Gotham operates is really interesting to me. The different crime families, the histories between them, and even how crime operated years prior to these current events all had me hooked into seeing more of this universe. Not just that, but also seeing in depth just how much Riddler's flood damaged and affected the city. And how certain characters were affected and how they have to move around and deal with that was really cool. This is a big benefit of this series in general, just seeing more of this Gotham and how many lives were lost, how many of the poorer neighborhoods have been affected, and even how the drug trade changed and how certain characters have to move around that was executed pretty well. The pacing of this show was also fantastic. Before release, when I found out it'd only be 8 episodes, based on most recent comic book show track records, I thought we'd just be meandering about, not really progressing as much or getting very surface level stuff that doesn't become important until about the last 3 episodes or so. But no, the structure of the show was near perfectly handled. The first 3 episodes were relatively slow, but I don't mind as it really needed to build its narrative, setting up a lot of characters' motivations, relationships, and dynamics amongst one another, and I found that to be pretty engaging when first watching it. But there is a notable shift in the dynamics of not only the characters, but who the audience is trying to root for in the 4th episode, and that's when the show really starts to take off in my opinion. The writing in this show as well is freaking fantastic. As I mentioned a bit ago, there is a big shift in who the audience really sees as the quote protagonist of this story, in that they write it in a way to where you'll often feel pretty conflicted as to who you really want to see come out on top in this little crime war. It takes some talent to be able to pull it off the way they did, especially in such a relatively short season, all things considered. But the writing isn't exactly flawless, however. Most of what I'm about to mention here borders on being nitpicky, but there are a few characters whose roles in this story aren't as fleshed out as they could be. Not to mention, a decent amount of things that happen here, whether it relates to a character's death or them escaping it and such, do rely on just a bit of plot contrivance. I refuse to believe that Nadia didn't smell the gasoline on her son, and even when seeing the flame get near them, she still just holds on to him for some fucking reason. On top of all the ways Oz narrowly avoids death, especially towards the end of the show. But a lot of that stuff can be forgiven in an otherwise incredibly well written show. The characters are, of course, the highlight in this story. Instead of starting out with the titular bird, I feel like it's better to go over who I think is the true protagonist of this story, Sophia Falcone. Sophia in the first episode was introduced as the show's antagonist, a big obstacle in Oz's rise to power, and as such, the show wants us to view her as such. But that key shift that gets presented in episode 4 is Sophia in the context of her full story. Sophia, someone who, while part of one of the biggest crime families in Gotham, was relatively good, I'd say. Just for her father, who notices her getting too close to the truth, decides to, along with the rest of the family, frame her for his murders, locking her away to be tortured day in and day out in Arkham Asylum for the next 10 years. Sophia is such a fascinating character to me because of how multifaceted she is. She is reasonably bitter and angry after her family, and especially her father's betrayal, but in a lot of ways aims to be better than them, aims to have a sense of honor and nobility while controlling the drug trade, but at the same time still operates by and under the same rules her father did nonetheless. It's so intriguing seeing this play out over the course of the show, and just as interesting because despite me calling her the actual protagonist, Sophia is still not that great of a person. Seeing how she devolved and had to fight and kill to survive in Arkham inadvertently turned her into the monster her father tried to paint her as. And even when she gets out, she's still portrayed as this ruthless force of nature, and it's executed really well. Sophia was an easy standout amongst the characters, and her fate at the end of the season was brilliantly tragic. By the time the finale rolled around, I was feeling pretty conflicted on whether or not they'd actually kill her off, and whether it'd be an actual good end to her story in this season. But they gave her what most would consider a fate worse than death by throwing her back in Arkham. Sophia's story in this season is just paved with tragedy, lies, and betrayal, and she was an absolutely amazing character to follow throughout. Quick sidebar, I gotta talk about Carmine. I already enjoyed what we got out of him in The Batman, but I love how this show continued to double down on just what kind of a diabolical monster he is. Strangling women was already evil as shit, but one of which being the wife of his 2 kids? And when one of said kids gets close to figuring it out, he frames them and sends them away to get tortured for years on end? Riddler let his ass off too easy if you ask me. Victor. Oh lord, Victor, man. I've seen this show compared to Breaking Bad a lot, and I can definitely see the similarities, and a lot of what I love about that show can be applied to the Penguin as well. I'm going to try to keep those comparisons to a minimum, however, just because I want to emphasize how well the show carries itself without comparing it to another work. With that said, Victor is very much the Jesse Pinkman of this show. A character who was thrusted into a life he had no reason being a part of, and we just follow him as we see him make the clear wrong steps that are inevitably going to lead to his downfall. Out of all the characters in this show, I think Vic is the easiest one to root for. Sophia, while having a sympathetic backstory, is still shown to not have the best moral character, and I can't blame her considering her circumstances. And with Oz, we'll get to that motherfucker in just a sec. But with Victor, it's easier to root for him because he's really just the most innocent, and added to the fact he's undoubtedly the one character in this show affected by Riddler's flood the most, with his whole neighborhood and his family being one of the major casualties. The foundation of Vic's character is his connection and relationship to Oz. And without going into detail just yet, seeing how wholesome yet kind of twisted this dynamic is was certainly interesting. Very early on, we see how pretty similar to Oz, Vic is just someone who thinks he's deserving of more. And through working with Oz, we see just how much he has to learn and the lengths he has to go through to get what he wants. Despite this life clearly not being for him, you can't help but root for him to just survive and come out okay. It was really cool to see him evolve and learn and take after Oz's pretty messed up teachings, but it was still cool nonetheless. Seeing just how willing he was to help Oz by the end was just really charming, and the bond we see them form and how Oz swears they're going to make a name for themselves and they're both going to be revered was pretty well handled. But in the end, Vic doesn't get what he wants. Instead, he just goes out a literal nobody. Just a nameless victim to the dark pool that is Gotham City. It's honestly just so tragic looking back on it because he had ample opportunity to escape his fate, but his wants got the better of him and inevitably led to his demise. But to go more in detail with that, we have to talk about Oz. Oswald motherfucking Cobb. Holy shit. Like I said, I loved Colin Farrell's take on the Penguin in the Batman, and from the first episode, everything I loved was still intact. Immediately from the first episode, I love how they set the precedent very early on that Oz is a really bad dude. That may sound like a weird thing to emphasize, but considering how many pieces of media that center around comic villains either make them super relatable and understandable, or even go and make them anti heroes or some bullshit. This show had my immediate respect from the jump for just having the villain be an actual fucking villain. Oz in this show is a slimy, grimy, conniving, diabolical piece of shit, and I loved every single minute of it. The show starts off with putting Oz in this very underdog-like position. He's been working under these bigger crime families like the Falcones for years, never taken seriously and often looked down upon and talked down to, and gone even longer in his life with just not having the life he feels like he deserves. Seeing the kind of guy he wants to be, like this old gangster from his childhood, Tex Calisteri.
Rex Calabrese.
Yeah, him. So at the start, you can't help but root for him. But that shift in episode 4 comes into play, and afterwards, you really start to see more of the kind of guy that Oz is. Like I said, he is one diabolical ass dude. Firstly, I just love how much of a smooth talker and a hustler they make Penguin in this universe. He's almost too good at talking people into winning them over or getting what he wants out of them. Oz is very much the kind of guy that you want to give the benefit of the doubt on multiple occasions, but then the show just goes and shows you several times that you can't. He is a conniving and manipulative little turd who will betray you on the flip of a dime when it suits him. There's a convo between him and Sophia where they discuss if Oz getting the Iceberg Lounge and running his own drug operation was worth Sophia getting locked up and tortured for 10 years. FYI, for context, the whole reason she wound up in Arkham is because Oz told her dad, Carmine, that she was talking to a reporter that was investigating him for murder. Anyway, he openly admits that for a guy like him that never had anything, yeah, it was worth it. He expresses a lot of remorse and guilt in the moment. And the convo ends with Sophia not knowing if she can trust him. She can't. And Oz just tells her that she'll have to keep letting him show her how. He won't. Only for several seconds later, when exposed for killing her brother, he immediately throws her under the bus and tries to smooth talk his way out of death, before just leaving her for dead. Good fucking god, Oswald. It hasn't even been 10 minutes since you last said that shit. And as the show goes on, he just gets worse and fucking worse, dude. I'll try not to list every single thing, because I think that'd be egregious as shit, but from how he treated Sophia, to his relationship with his own mother, who we'll get into in just a sec, and Victor, oh fucking god, Victor, man. To go over his relationship with his mom, Frances, this is the thing that intrigued me the most by the end. Because at the beginning and throughout the show, it's established that all of this, the gangster life, him trying to destroy the Falcone and Maroni crime families, is all for the sake of his mother. He wants to get these guys out of the way to give his mom the life she deserves. And that again adds to that underdog feel they try to set up in the beginning. And all throughout the show, you see just how much he really cares for her and tries to take care of her, only for the finale to flip that on its head. For a bit of context, earlier and throughout the series, the show makes several references to Oz's brothers, who had been long dead by this point. Well, in the penultimate episode, it's revealed that Oz, after feeling jealous of the attention they'd always received from their mother, trapped them in the sewers where they would eventually drown due to the heavy rain and flooding. And this is another thing I find fascinating, because the show never makes it clear if Oz did this with the intention of them dying. As I said, you could never put it past him to be absolutely despicable, especially in this show. But anyway, when being confronted to the point where Frances will even get her finger cut off, Oz doesn't tell the truth. He just refuses. And even when Frances openly says she knows that he killed them, he still denies it. And that is when it all became clear. He's more fascinated and infatuated with the idea he has of his mother in his head, instead of Frances herself. For years, he's been doing this for her, and when that illusion of the proud, happy mom has the possibility of fading, he continues to deny it and live in his own lie. I unironically believe that Oz has spun so much bullshit in his life that he almost starts to believe it himself. And even going as far as to leave her alive in a vegetative state after her stroke, despite promising episodes earlier that he'd kill her if she got to that point, just further proves how self-serving Oz really is, even if he tries to pride himself on having other folks' interests at heart. Okay, let's talk about Victor. What he did to Vic was absolutely unforgivable. And I know I talked about their dynamic from Vic's perspective, but from Oz's, it's pretty interesting as well. Very early on, despite his psychotic tendencies, there is definitely a hint of genuine liking towards Vic from Oz. He's very much a Batman to Vic's Robin, in a sense that he sees a bit of himself in the guy. So much so that when he thinks Vic sees this relationship as nothing more than a hostage situation, he actually seems hurt.
I gave you clothes, money, a place to crash. You got all the opportunity in the world right fucking here. For Christ's sake. But this is all you feel.
Okay, well, you see, Mr. Cobblepot.
Shut your goddamn mouth.
Cobb. Mr. Cobb. I didn't think you were that sensitive about that. Well, when one of the very first interactions you have with the guy, on the very night you meet him, mere minutes after you meet him, you say to him, and I quote, you and me, we're in this together now. Which means I own you. So yeah, no fucking shit the guy feels like he's in a hostage situation.
Watch your goddamn mouth!
Okay, so you know I'm right. That's why you're getting salty.
I'll spray paint your ass!
And yeah, seeing the various ways they bond was really entertaining, which just makes Oz killing him that much more heartbreaking. Through having his mom be used against him, he comes to his own sick conclusion that having people he cares about is a weakness, and as such, he does away with the only other person he had grown a connection with, being Victor. This was the moment I and several others watching the show just got an even bigger glimpse at the absolute monster the Penguin is. I could go on, but Penguin was just written so perfectly in this show. I don't think I've ever consumed a piece of media that expertly makes you despise the titular character in a compelling and interesting way like this show did here. This ain't the kind of hate that stems from a character being badly written or annoying. This is the kind of hate that leaves you more intrigued and fascinated and just wanting to see how much worse they can get. And I especially love it because Penguin for a while was just kind of treated like a one-note villain. Just used for little gags here and there instead of being treated like an actual formidable opponent Batman could go up against. That ain't me saying that Oz has always been a pioneer Batman villain who can always give the Bat a run for his money, but I just like how they make him less of a joke here and more of a twisted and diabolical mastermind. Oz is just a sickeningly fascinating character, and I can't wait to see what else they do with him for the rest of this franchise. Quick sidebar, but the last shot of this show is so fucking funny because they show the bat signal flashing.
I just like to think that with all the bullshit that's gone down in this city recently, with all the shootouts and whole neighborhoods getting blown up and shit, that they've been flashing that damn thing every night, just waiting for this motherfucker to show up.
They're taking back Gotham!
Where the hell is he? These three were obviously the big standouts, but every other character was handled pretty well. The rest of the Falcones were pretty interesting, getting more of Carmine was really cool as well, and even seeing the Maroni family was interesting. Frances Cobb was also really damn good. Her character, like others, is just shrouded in tragedy. After finding out that Oz killed her other two sons, he inadvertently smooth-talked himself out of getting killed, like his mother had arranged him to be, but she had been just trying to use him as a way to get herself a better life. And it's really interesting because in the first half of the series, the way she talks to and treats Oswald kind of makes you feel bad for him. They have you think this verbally abusive mom is one of the reasons for his sociopathic nature, only to find out that it's incredibly justified and Oz is a true piece of shit. And her story just ending with being stuck in a vegetative state all for Oz's satisfaction is just monumentally fucked. All around, I think the character writing is solid. Not every character is done particularly well. I'm specifically referring to Dr. Julian Rush, whose presence on the show just feels super odd. His relationship with Sophia is just weird, because it felt like they were kind of setting him up to be this kind of weird, pervy, and creepy doctor, maybe just adding to the list of men that have negatively affected Sophia's life, but they don't do that. And for the rest of the show, he's just kind of there until they use him to get information out of Francis. But overall, the character writing was really good in my opinion. There isn't a character who I think is written outright badly or terribly. It's just really good. The performances as well sell the show even more, man. Colin fucking Farrell as Penguin. Jesus Christ.
I don't usually spit this around all willy-nilly because I think more often than not, people just say it to emphasize how much they really like something. But Colin Farrell's performance as the Penguin in this show, to me, is unironically Oscar-worthy.
Just the way he completely envelops himself into this character, the way he walks, the way he talks, the different mannerisms he adopts, the absolute devilish look in his eyes, it's insane, man. And even the ways he's able to do the subtle stuff, like the little face, eye, and mouth twitches he does whenever Oz is trying to think up some bullshit, I love it. When I heard that Kristen Milioti was cast as Sophia, I was admittedly a little disappointed. I had hoped they'd have gotten someone with a bigger build to invoke Sophia's design from the Long Halloween comic, but after watching the show, I put my foot right in my dumb fucking mouth because she absolutely killed it. Between her and Colin, I honestly can't tell who steals the show more. She, like Colin, put so many interesting subtleties into her performance as Sophia. That dead-eyed glare that's double time enticing but frightening. She really sells Sophia as this force to be reckoned with, but a sympathetic and empathetic one as well. Renzi Feliz was outstanding as Victor. We even got guys like Mark Strong and Clancy Brown as Carmine Falcone and Sal Maroni, both of which were phenomenal. It's crazy how well Mark steps in the place of John Turturro, and Clancy just kills it no matter what DC villain he plays, honestly. All the folks that played the different mob bosses, the woman who plays Nadia, whose name I can't pronounce to save my life, did a great job as well. The kid actors who played Benny, Jack, and especially young Oz did a really good job. The woman that played young Francis was great, and Deirdre O'Connell, who plays the current day Francis, was absolutely amazing. The cast all around was just perfect in my eyes. The production value of this show can't be scoffed at either. There's a conversation to be had on how this show presents and depicts Matt Reeves' version of Gotham City. Because the series is enshrouded in darkness, a lot of the character and atmosphere that was presented in that movie doesn't really carry over as seamlessly here, in my opinion. I've seen some people say that the way they handle Gotham feels a tad lower budgeted compared to the movie, and I personally can't help but disagree. The cinematography and lighting is still incredibly solid for most of the show. But yeah, I will say it doesn't exactly feel like the same Gotham from the Matt Reeves film. It's not a major issue, just something I've noticed over the course of watching the show. But everything else from the practical effects or the gore was great. Well, maybe gore isn't the right word to describe it. You ain't gonna be seeing guts flying or anything. But there is a surprising amount of blood in this show. At least more than I was expecting. But it fits perfectly within this universe.
This is gonna sound really stupid, but am I the only one who keeps forgetting that The Batman isn't an R-rated movie? Like, just the way that film carries and presents itself would lead you to believe that it is, even though it isn't.
I don't know why I brought this up, I just found it a little weird. But also, the makeup effects on Penguin were expertly done. It's again incredibly commendable that Farrell was able to perform as well as he did, while having pounds of makeup and prosthetics on him. And props to the makeup artist for doing such a phenomenal job with it.
There's a moment in the first episode where Oz is fully nude from head to toe, and it looks incredible. Probably down to his prosthetic little penguin pecker and everything. And that ain't me bullshit. The old Irishman confirmed this himself. Hey, do you think Oz and Eve ever take turns incubating their egg?
Yeah, the production quality was just top notch for this series, and the score by Mick Giacchino was absolutely incredible as well. Overall, The Penguin was just an absolutely outstanding series, with incredible cinematography and an impeccable score, absolutely phenomenal character writing, and a cast that expertly gave it their all. Really good production quality, and an overall pace that was really good at keeping viewers hooked and interested. The Penguin was simply astonishing.
So, with all that said, if you agree or disagree with anything I've said in this video, let me know right down there in the comments below. Also, be sure to like and subscribe. This is Darion of GNB Productions, and take care.